What's up, people? It's Adam. I recently got back from my trip to Joshua Tree, which was a great adventure. If you haven't had a chance to check that video out, please do. Today I thought I'd take the time and talk about some of the gear that I used. One of the first pieces of gear that I used was this Outdoor Research Alpine Bivy. It is a great piece of gear, and I used it in lieu of a tent that I didn't have, so I chose the lighter option of using a bivy sack. Now, the specs on this bivy sack are, it's seam sealed, very waterproof, although I wasn't dealing with a lot of water. But some of the specs on this is it is good for backpacking, mountaineering. It's about 18.7 ounces, and it says average packed weight is about 20.6 ounces. I'm not really sure what they mean about that. The interior height is about 19 3/4 inches, so at the highest point off of your face, that's how much clearance that you have. It's very spacious on the inside, and for the most part, I loved it. I took it down to about 27, got to 27 degrees the night that I was using it in the desert, and I was also dealing with a pretty severe wind chill. The wind chill wasn't able to really penetrate the bivy itself. It comes with like this no-seam mesh that covers your face, so that it protects you from bugs and stuff like that if it's like nice weather. Primarily this was made to be taken in the mountains by mountaineers, and it's very useful for setting up when it's snowing, rain, sleet. It's supposed to protect you from the elements and be a full-fledged shelter. They do make tiny, more emergency style bivvies. I opted for this one just because of its very light pack weight, and the conditions I was in were beautiful for stargazing, so I went out there, saw some great, beautiful stars. I didn't get to get any pictures of them, but maybe next time for sure. I definitely think Joshua Tree warrants more time, and it warrants more time to be seen and future trips for future visits. One of the problems that I faced when using this, however, was the intense condensation, although part of that was probably my fault because I zipped it up all the way and then fell asleep during my trip. I fell asleep inside the bivy with it all zipped up, and when you do that, it does ventilate, but not to the extent that it needs to. So the condensation builds up, freezes, you get frost on the inside, and you wake up and before you know it, your whole sleeping bag or quilt is just covered in frost. So that's what I was dealing with. It was only my second time using the bivy, so I'm not like a bivy aficionado by any means, but it was a lot of fun trying it out, and I'm sure that I'll deal with some conditions where I might take this again, try it when it's not as windy, although sometimes you can't avoid those conditions and you just gotta deal with what nature gives you. To add on to this system, I paired a 4-season pad. This is Ecotech Outdoors, and it has a very high R value. I believe the R value is over 4. I think it's about 4.5. So that's plenty to get you into winter camping. And the thing about winter camping is you have to have a thick enough pad, or maybe you can't buy this and you have to stack like 2 summer pads. That works too. When you stack pads, you add 1 R value to the next R value, and that increases the heat retaining efficiency so that you don't lose more heat through conduction. And winter pads are designed so you can carry less. Most of the time in winter you are already carrying a lot of weight, so something like this where you have it all condensed into one, and it basically gives you the same R value compared to like 2 summer pads. So it's something to think about for sure. This worked great. At no point did I have any cold spots underneath me. This is a great pad company to check out. I've used this a couple times in New Hampshire and out here during the winter on the desert. So very happy with this. Haven't had any tears or anything, and it packs down pretty small. So pretty good bang for your buck here. And then lastly, I paired this whole system with a 20-degree quilt from Hammock Gear. It's very well made, and I opted for the closed footbox because of my last trip where it wasn't closed. I had drafts all night during my last trip during the Sespe Wilderness, and that ended up keeping my feet cold. But with this sewn-in footbox, I was able to keep my feet nice and warm. Now, this isn't just a regular 20-degree. This has 2 ounces extra overstuff. I'm not exactly sure how much extra degrees that gives you. It's debatable. I'll have to ask Hammock Gear and see how much ounces of overstuff add to the overall warmth of the bag. But it was very, very warm. The only cold parts were the drafty areas towards my head where I had it all unzipped and exposed to the elements. So something to think about. I definitely recommend when you're using bivvies to wear a hat. Full layers helps to keep all of the heat in your environment and not expose it to the elements. If I had to do this trip again, I would have tried to allot more time to pick an area where I would be more concealed from the elements, because where I was, it was just completely exposed, no place for the wind to get blocked. There were some bushes, but they were pretty light, so it didn't really do much, and the direction that the wind was coming in was just not ideal. The flat spot was ideal, beautiful scenery, and everything like that, just optimal viewing point for the sunset, but that wind was just something else, just blowing all night. Had I been up next to a rock or something like that, thicker bushes or trees, that might have been the factor that could have been there for me to open up the top of my bivvy and not have all the issues with my condensation. If any of you guys have any secrets for condensation besides just ventilating the top, let me know. That's the only thing I can think of, but again, I don't have a lot of experience with bivvies. It's only a couple times that I've used it, and yeah, I would love to hear your thoughts on that. Another option to block yourself from the wind with the system like this, with the bivvy sack, is to pair your bivvy with a tarp. So you have your tarp on the ground, and then you have the bivvy up top blocking you, and that really, something like that is optimal. I decided not to do that this time for the reason being I just wanted to see how light it could go. I was already carrying double the water that I was last time, so because I was carrying double the water that I did last time, I opted not to carry the tarp and just did the bivvy with the warmth elements that I mentioned before, and was overall pretty happy about it. But I had to end my trip earlier than I wanted to, because I just had all this frost start melting on my bag. It's down, and once down gets wet, it doesn't keep you as warm efficiently. It was going to drop down in the 20s again, and had I done that, I may have gotten myself in a situation that's not ideal, to be out there in the middle freezing dark with cold blowing wind. So yeah, I think lessons were learned and improvements will definitely be made for next time. Maybe even periodically opening up every hour to ventilate condensation. But yeah, I can't wait to test this same system maybe in some higher elevations, higher mountains, and just see how far I can push this system. For those of you that don't know about bivvies, the bivvy was designed for mountaineers so that it was designed to be, there's a couple different styles. So there's a full bivvy like the one I have, which is like a full shelter. It's designed in lieu of a tent, and it's like a really tiny one-person tent. Mountaineers would pack that in their bag because it's super light. They go up into the mountain, and if it snows and if they're short on time because they've been climbing all day, they can just open up the sack. Even if it's dumping on them, it'll repel all the snow and keep them warm and their gear warm. Crawl in there, and they can wait it out until it's nice, and survive up there like that. They can also be smaller, more portable. I have a bivvy that's literally the size of a Coke can, and it's supposed to be packed in your essential items, along with your other essential items like your compass, flashlight, matches, fire starters, GPS, all that stuff that would be essential. And even if you're going for a day hike, you can use that small Coke can bivvy. It's like a space blanket, except it's like a 360-degree space blanket. Those kinds of bivvies. So most of those small bivvies are one-time use. The one I have is a little more robust. It's like an emergency use, one that you can reuse over and over again, depending on how long you've been in it. Really good for a rescue type situation. Small, light, gives you peace of mind. The one I have in particular is the SOL Survive Outdoors Longer Bivvy, and there's different breathabilities of the fabric and how long it can keep you warm. I highly recommend taking that even on day hikes. You could be in a situation where you fall down, break your leg or your ankle. You could be by yourself. First of all, I don't recommend just being by yourself unless you let somebody know what your plans are, so they can start looking for you if you don't show up on time. Very important to do that. But if you find yourself separated from a group and you're in that injured state, you can crawl into that bivvy. A lot of times hypothermia is one of those enemies when you are outside in the outdoor environment. Whether it be the desert, mountains, forest, hypothermia is a big killer. Big killer. So you have to bear in mind that hypothermia doesn't take long to set in. And I mean, a space blanket works too, but a more efficient solution would be to cover the body 360 degrees, get some insulation under you, and you buy yourself a lot more time compared to just being out there with nothing but your clothes. Because your clothes can only do so much before the heat just dissipates, and law of thermodynamics, eventually you will cool down, especially in winter, especially in snow. All different variables require different gear, so to always take into account where you're going for your trip, what the weather's doing, and please try to be prepared as best as you can. Now, I've talked about situations where a bivvy would be ideal in both a lightweight backpacking and emergency situation. Now, where would bivvies not be ideal? Obviously, this is not something that you want to take in the summer. I would suffocate and sweat to death if I took this style bivvy in the summer. They might make some lighter style options, like almost like a one-person tent, that are more breathable than this. But I would, for the most part, not want to bring one in summer. For the most part, I would not like to bring this in the summer because it would be way too hot. Environments that are ideal for this: mountains when it's cold, because there are some mountains when it's hot, but generally cooler weather, drier weather. You can bring it when it's wet and snowing. Would recommend a tarp to keep the majority of that water off, but if you can be out when it's snowing. It's what some styles were designed for. Make sure that you check to see whatever style of bivvy that you get, to see that if it's waterproof, seam sealed, and take into account the weather, because waking up in a puddle of water is definitely not ideal or fun. Another thing where a bivvy would not be ideal is if you were a person that gets highly claustrophobic. If small spaces are not your thing, if you don't like anything near your face while you're sleeping, even though my particular one had a bar that wrapped around, you had about this much room clearance, so you could like move around, so you could get your headlamp and all that. If you are a person that does not like small spaces, then please avoid the bivvy. Get a bigger tent, hammock. It's definitely not for everybody, so keep that in mind before just if you should know yourself well enough if you are scared of small spaces, where before you crawl on a bivvy, know that before you get one, and just go with a tent. A situation that occurred a few years ago up in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. There was a woman named Kate Matrasova, and she went up to hike Mount Adams and Mount Madison. She was attempting a one-day winter presidential traverse, which is a great feat in mountaineering. Even though the mountains of New Hampshire are considered small by mountaineering standards, they are incredibly cold in the winter and very difficult to hike because they get so much snow, so much ice, so much wind. I mean, that's what mountains do in the winter, right? But the caveat to that is that particular mountain chain up in northern New Hampshire is situated along 3 different weather tracks that all run through there. It's like a weather junction. You have weather coming from the Midwest coming over. You have systems coming from south to north, and there's another weather system there that I can't remember, but you have a huge variability in weather systems that can blow in at any moment. And if someone's not paying attention to the weather, say you go up and then you don't have signal because it's remote out there, stuff can change. And Kate Matrasova got herself in a situation where she didn't have the full picture of information. Had she have had that, maybe she would have made the decision to turn around, but she didn't. She kept on going towards Star Lake on the Star Lake Trail, and she ended up succumbing to severe hypothermia. And maybe had she have had access to a bivvy system, any of the ones that I mentioned before, then perhaps she would have survived her ordeal. Unfortunately, she perished. But it's a good lesson in risk management, in understanding the environment. Sometimes those lessons are painful because of the wonderful people that it's happened to. And it's not fun to see someone so talented and who seems like they had their whole life ahead of them perish. But I think it's important to learn lessons from people like that, so that it can serve as a learning lesson for others who are outdoor enthusiasts, who are mountaineers, who want to push the limits and see the world and have fun. And I'm all about that. I still think it's important to have fun, but also be prepared. So stories like that stand to educate us and keep us informed on hazards while we're out there. This is the book that I mentioned, and it's called Where You'll Find Me. This one is by Ty Gagne, and it's a very good read if anyone is interested in winter camping, mountaineering. If you live in New Hampshire, or if you want to visit New Hampshire, very good to know what you're getting into. This book is tragic, but it also shows you the intricacies of search and rescue, what it takes when somebody presses that button on your personal locator beacon, and it gives you a true understanding of what being remote really is. Because even though you can see that road down there from where you are, it does not mean that they're going to send the choppers right away, depending on conditions. And some places don't even have choppers. It's like teams of people. They have to carry all their heavy gear for them because they have to look out for themselves. It's not that they don't want to help you, but the first thing is they can't create another casualty by going out there to get you, and then risking they're already risking their limb going out because maybe the conditions are bad. So they have to look after themselves and you. So they're carrying extra gear along with their medical equipment and anything that they might potentially need. Definitely recommend this book if you have some time. And that's everything that I wanted to talk about today. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you next time when you join me on my next adventure.